Welcome back to Lore Forge. Tonight we're diving deep into one of gaming's most tragic tales of hubris, horror, and the terrible price humanity pays when it reaches for powers beyond comprehension. This is the story of the Old Blood, the miraculous substance that promised to cure every ailment, to elevate humanity beyond its mortal limitations, and instead transformed an entire city into a nightmare from which there is no waking. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking through fog-choked streets where Gothic architecture reaches toward a moon that hangs impossibly low in the blood-red sky. Picture yourself in Yharnam, a city that once stood as a beacon of medical miracles, where pilgrims traveled from across the world seeking salvation from diseases that ravaged the human body. They came in carriages and on foot, the wealthy in fine clothes and the desperate in rags, all united by their suffering and their hope. They came seeking healing. They found transformation, but not the kind anyone could have predicted. The streets that welcomed them with promises of salvation would become the same streets where their transformed bodies would be hunted, burned, and piled high in grotesque pyres that lit the eternal night. The Old Blood is more than just a plot device in Bloodborne's intricate narrative. It represents humanity's eternal dance with forbidden knowledge, our willingness to embrace darkness when it promises light, and the catastrophic consequences of playing God with forces that exist beyond our understanding. This isn't simply about a disease or a cure. This is about evolution twisted into devolution, salvation corrupted into damnation, and the moment when humanity discovered that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. It's about the fine line between healing and poison, between transcendence and corruption, between the desire to help and the hubris that destroys. Tonight, we'll trace the Old Blood's journey from its discovery in ancient ruins beneath the earth to the moment when Yharnam's streets ran red with more than just blood. We'll explore how scholars became monsters, how healers became the sick, and how a miracle cure became the very poison it promised to prevent. We'll walk through the laboratories where terrible experiments were conducted in the name of progress, through the cathedrals where cosmic entities were worshipped as gods, and through the nightmares that exist in the spaces between reality and dream. Before we descend into the depths of this tale, if you're enjoying these explorations into gaming's darkest lore, please take a moment to subscribe. It genuinely helps me continue creating these deep dives into the stories that haunt us long after we've put down the controller. The Discovery, Bergenworth, and the Pthumerian ruins. Long before the Healing Church rose to power, before blood ministration became a household practice, there existed an institution dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge in its purest form. Bergenworth, a college of scholars nestled near what would become Yharnam, represented humanity's noblest aspirations. Here, under the guidance of Master Willem, the brightest minds of the age gathered to study history, archaeology, and the fundamental nature of human consciousness. They believed that knowledge was the path to transcendence, that understanding the cosmos would elevate humanity to heights previously unimaginable. Among Willem's students walked names that would echo through history in ways none could have predicted. Laurence, brilliant and ambitious, showed a particular fascination with practical applications of their research. Yharnam, quiet and capable, often served as protection during expeditions into dangerous ruins. Mikolash, eccentric even in his youth, pored over ancient texts that others dismissed as indecipherable ravings. And Maria, of noble Canehurst blood, brought both martial prowess and keen intellect to their endeavors. Beneath the earth where Byrgenwerth conducted its research lay something far older than human civilization. The Pthumerian labyrinths stretched down into darkness, layer upon layer of catacombs and ruins that predated recorded history. These weren't merely tombs or storage vaults. The Pthumerians had constructed something far more ambitious and far more terrible. They had built a bridge between worlds, between human reality and something vast and incomprehensible that existed beyond the boundaries of mortal perception. The deeper one descended, the more the architecture defied conventional understanding. Corridors that should intersect never met. Rooms existed in spaces that geometry insisted could not exist. Gravity itself seemed negotiable in certain chambers. The stone used in construction bore properties that no natural rock should possess, warm to the touch despite the chill of the depths, faintly luminescent even after millennia of darkness. The Pthumerians themselves had been superhuman beings, tall and pale, with faces locked in permanent expressions of awe or terror. Their bodies, preserved in ways that defied natural decomposition, showed evidence of deliberate modification. Their civilization had achieved heights of knowledge that modern scholars could barely comprehend. But that knowledge had come with a price that became increasingly evident the deeper the explorers ventured. The ruins the Byrgenwerth scholars explored showed signs of deliberate transformation, of a civilization that had attempted to evolve beyond its physical form and had succeeded in ways that defied human understanding. Bones grew in impossible directions, forming structures that served no recognizable biological purpose. Skulls showed cavities for organs that humans had never possessed, suggesting senses or capabilities beyond mortal ken. And most tellingly, despite their apparent age stretching back thousands of years, the remains showed no signs of decay. The Pthumerians existed in a state between life and death, preserved by forces that Willem's scholars could only guess at. The deeper Willem's expeditions ventured, the stranger the discoveries became. They found evidence of communion with beings the Pthumerians had called Great Ones, entities that existed in dimensions overlapping with human reality only partially. These weren't gods in any sense that humans understood. They operated according to logic that human minds could barely grasp, and their influence on those who contacted them proved catastrophic more often than beneficial. In the deepest reaches of the labyrinth, the scholars made a discovery that would change everything. They found Queen Yharnam herself, the Pthumerian monarch, lying in a chamber that hummed with barely contained cosmic energy. Her body, though ancient beyond measure, showed signs of life. Blood still moved through her veins, though it flowed with an unnatural rhythm that seemed to pulse in time with forces beyond the physical world. This blood was different from anything the scholars had encountered. It was alive in ways that blood should never be alive. It responded to human tissue in ways that violated every law of biology the scholars understood. When they extracted samples and brought them back to Bergenworth for study, they began to realize the magnitude of what they had discovered. Laurence became obsessed with the blood's properties. His experiments, conducted initially in secret, revealed capabilities that bordered on miraculous. The blood caused rapid regeneration in damaged tissue. Diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia simply vanished when exposed to it. Wounds that should have taken weeks to heal closed in mere hours. The implications were staggering. Here was a substance that could potentially end human suffering, cure every ailment, perhaps even defeat death itself. But Master Willem urged caution. His studies of the Pthumerian texts, fragmentary though his translations were, suggested that the blood came with terrible costs. The Pthumerians hadn't ascended to godhood through their communion with the Great Ones. They had been transformed by contact with beings whose very existence was antithetical to human life. The great carvings and texts spoke of entities that existed beyond mortal comprehension, whose gifts came wrapped in madness and mutation. Willem's most famous teaching, repeated to all his students until it became known as the Bergenworth adage, was simple and dire. Fear the old blood. He believed that humanity needed to evolve mentally and spiritually before it could safely interact with the Great One's power. True transcendence, Willem argued, came not from physical transformation, but from expanding human consciousness to perceive cosmic truth without being destroyed by it. He spoke of lining one's brain with eyes, of achieving insight that would allow humans to see reality as it truly existed, rather than through the limited filters of mortal perception. This path was slow and difficult, requiring patience and wisdom that few possessed. Laurence saw Willem's caution differently. To him, it seemed like cowardice dressed up as wisdom. People were suffering and dying from diseases that this miraculous blood could cure. How could they sit in their college debating philosophy and studying ancient texts, while human beings experienced preventable agony? The blood offered immediate, tangible benefits. Surely humanity could learn to harness its power while studying its properties, using it to save lives while understanding its deeper implications. The schism between Willem and Laurence wasn't sudden. It grew over months and years of increasingly heated debates. Willem watched with growing concern as Laurence's experiments became more bold, more reckless. Laurence saw Willem becoming more withdrawn, more obsessed with meditation and the expansion of consciousness while ignoring practical applications of their discoveries. Other scholars found themselves forced to choose sides. Some believed in Willem's cautious approach, that understanding must precede application. Others were swayed by Laurence's charisma and the undeniable results of his blood experiments. The College of Bergenworth, once united in purpose, began to fracture along philosophical lines that could never be reconciled. The final break came when Laurence announced his intention to leave Bergenworth and take his research to the nearby city that would come to bear the Pthumerian queen's name, Yharnam. He would establish a new organization one dedicated to using the blood's healing properties to benefit humanity immediately, rather than waiting for theoretical transcendence that might never come. In their final conversation, Willem warned him one last time, speaking the Byrgenwerth adage they both knew well: "Fear the old blood." Laurence promised he would not forget their adage, though his subsequent actions would prove otherwise. He gathered those scholars who shared his vision and departed Byrgenwerth, taking with him vials of the old blood and a dream of human salvation through miraculous healing. The Schism, Laurence and the birth of the Healing Church. When Laurence and his followers arrived in Yharnam, they didn't present themselves as revolutionaries or mad scientists. They came as educated physicians offering a miracle cure to a population desperate for hope. The early days of what would become the Healing Church were marked by careful cultivation of trust and systematic demonstration of the blood's incredible properties. Laurence understood that to change the world, he needed to win hearts and minds, not just prove scientific principles. The scholars established themselves in the heart of Yharnam, eventually constructing the grand cathedral that would become the physical and spiritual center of their organization. But in those early days, they worked out of modest facilities, treating patients one at a time, carefully documenting the miraculous results of blood ministration. A blind man could see. A crippled woman walked. Diseases that had been death sentences became minor inconveniences that vanished after a simple transfusion. Word spread quickly through Yharnam and beyond. This wasn't the gradual acceptance of a new medical technique. This was a wildfire of hope burning through communities that had known only suffering. Families who had watched loved ones waste away from incurable illnesses suddenly had options. The elderly found vigor returning to bodies worn down by age. Children born with genetic conditions incompatible with life were transformed into healthy, thriving individuals. The blood worked miracles, and Laurence's organization became known as the Healing Church, a name that reflected both the medical and spiritual transformation it promised. But Laurence had learned from his time at Byrgenwerth. He understood that Willem's warnings, however overcautious they might seem, contained kernels of wisdom worth heeding. The Healing Church would not distribute the pure old blood directly to the public. Instead, they developed a system using blood saints, young women who showed particular compatibility with the old blood's transformative properties. These women, chosen for their purity of spirit and constitution, would undergo repeated ministrations of the original blood, allowing their own blood to become infused with its healing properties in a more diluted, presumably safer form. The blood saints occupied a strange position in the church hierarchy. They were simultaneously revered as holy figures and exploited for their unique ability. Healing Church nuns were chosen for their merit as vessels for blood and groomed specifically as blood saints. Adela, one such blood saint, saw her role as sacred duty. She and others like her provided their blood to help the faithful, their bodies cultivating blood infused with the old blood's healing properties in a more diluted form. The church presented this as volunteer work, a calling that only the most spiritually pure could fulfill. The reality was more complex and darker than the official narrative suggested. As the healing church grew in power and influence, it developed a sophisticated hierarchy to manage the distribution and study of blood. The choir formed from the most intellectually gifted scholars who had followed Laurence from Bergenworth. They established themselves in the upper levels of the grand cathedral, both literally and figuratively, above the common concerns of everyday blood ministration. The choir's mission went beyond simple healing. They sought to understand the cosmic implications of the old blood, to make contact with the great ones themselves, and to achieve the transcendence that Willem had theorized about through different means. Parallel to the choir's formation, another group emerged with even more esoteric goals. The School of Mensis, led by Mikolash, one of Laurence's fellow defectors from Bergenworth, established itself in Yharnam, the unseen village on Yharnam's outskirts. Where the choir sought gradual understanding through study and controlled experimentation, the School of Mensis pursued direct, forceful communion with the Great Ones. Their methods were radical, even by the standards of an organization already pushing the boundaries of medical ethics. The early successes of the healing church were genuine and undeniable. For the first few years, blood ministration seemed to be exactly what Laurence had promised, a miracle cure without significant downsides. Pilgrims flooded into Yharnam by the thousands, bringing wealth and prestige to what had been a relatively unremarkable city. Grand architectural projects transformed Yharnam into a Gothic masterpiece, with soaring cathedrals and elaborate public works that reflected the city's new status as a center of medical miracles and spiritual enlightenment. But even in these early, optimistic days, signs of trouble emerged for those paying attention. Some patients who received blood ministration reported disturbing dreams. They spoke of vast cities with impossible architecture, of beings that watched from dimensions beyond normal perception, of a calling that pulled them towards something they couldn't name or understand. The church dismissed these as temporary side effects, the mind adjusting to the blood's transformative properties. They established quiet wards for those whose dreams became too intense, keeping them comfortable while studying their symptoms in secret. The first beast transformation marked a turning point in the church's history. A pilgrim who had received blood ministration months earlier transformed one night, his body twisting and growing into something lupine and terrible. The creature retained just enough intelligence to be truly dangerous, hunting through Yharnam's streets with predatory cunning before being put down by hunters that Laurence had begun training for precisely this eventuality. The church covered up the incident, claiming a wild animal had somehow entered the city. But Laurence and his inner circle knew better. They had seen evidence in the Pthumerian ruins of similar transformations, civilizations consumed by beast scourges after dabbling too deeply in the old blood's power. They had believed themselves smarter, more careful, better able to control the blood's darker aspects. The appearance of that first beast suggested otherwise. Rather than halt blood ministration to study this new development, the church intensified its research. They established secret facilities, including the research hall above the Grand Cathedral's main chamber, where they could study the transformation process in controlled conditions. They recruited hunters like German to deal with transformations as they occurred, developing specialized weapons and tactics for fighting creatures that had once been human. And they continued distributing blood to the public, because to stop would be to admit failure, to acknowledge that Willem had been right all along. The transformation of Yharnam from modest city to prosperous metropolis happened with stunning speed. Within a decade of the Healing Church's founding, Yharnam had become one of the most important cities in the region. Its economy boomed on the blood trade. Its population swelled with pilgrims who stayed after being cured, unwilling to leave the city that had saved them. Its architecture reached toward the sky as if trying to bridge the gap between Earth and cosmos, Gothic spires stretching up toward a moon that seemed to hang lower each night. But prosperity came with hidden costs that would only become apparent as the years passed. The blood that flowed through Yharnam's veins, both literal and metaphorical, carried within it the seeds of the city's destruction. Every transfusion was a gamble. Every healed patient was a potential beast. Every success story was shadowed by the possibility of transformation into something monstrous. The Healing Church had opened a door that could never be fully closed, and through that door, horrors beyond human comprehension were beginning to seep into reality. The source, great ones and cosmic horror. To understand the old blood's true nature, one must understand its source. The blood didn't simply exist as a miraculous medical substance waiting to be discovered. It was a medium, a conduit between human reality and something vast and terrible that existed beyond mortal perception. The Great Ones were beings of impossible complexity, entities that existed partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously. What humans perceived of them, the tentacles and eyes and geometry that defied physics, were merely the portions that intersected with three-dimensional space, like shadows cast by objects existing in higher dimensions. Their true forms remained forever beyond human comprehension, existing in states that human language had no words to describe and human minds had no framework to process. Any attempt to perceive them fully resulted in madness or dissolution of consciousness, the mind simply unable to contain the truth of their existence. The Great Ones operated according to logic that human minds could barely grasp. They weren't evil in any human sense. Evil requires intent, requires understanding of harm, requires existence within a moral framework. They weren't particularly good either, for the same reasons. They simply existed on scales of reality where individual human lives mattered less than the movements of atoms, where entire civilizations rose and fell in what might be the blink of an eye to their cosmic perception. Yet they seemed drawn to humanity, fascinated by the spark of consciousness that allowed humans to perceive, however dimly, the cosmic truths that the Great Ones embodied. Perhaps humans represented novelty to beings for whom time held no meaning. Perhaps our struggles amused them. Or perhaps they simply recognized in us a reflection of themselves, beings trying to understand forces beyond their comprehension. Among the Great Ones, one stood out for its connection to the Healing Church, Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos. While other Great Ones existed as distant, incomprehensible forces, Ebrietas had been found in the Pthumerian ruins, apparently abandoned or left behind when her kind departed to higher planes of existence. The choir discovered her using the Great East Chalice, performing rituals in the deepest layers of the labyrinth beneath Yharnam. What they found was a being of terrible beauty and horrific form, a creature that resembled nothing in nature, yet evoked a strange sympathy in those who beheld her. Ebrietas became central to the Healing Church's operations in ways the public never understood. She wasn't merely studied, she was worshipped, communed with, and became a source for the Church's continued research. Evidence suggests she may have provided the old blood that the Church distributed, though the exact nature of this relationship remains shrouded in mystery. Her cooperation with the Church presents one of the deepest enigmas in Yharnam's history. Was she truly abandoned, seeking connection with any beings who would accept her? Did she have goals beyond human understanding that the Church's activities somehow furthered? Or was she simply indifferent, allowing humans to take what they wanted because their entire civilization meant nothing on the cosmic scale she inhabited? The choir established themselves as Ebrietas' caretakers and interpreters. They built the upper cathedral ward specifically to house and protect her, hiding her in chambers deep beneath the grand cathedral where only the highest-ranking church members could access. Through communion with Ebrietas, the choir gained insights that revolutionized their understanding of reality itself. They learned that the cosmos wasn't distant, wasn't the vast, empty space between stars. The cosmos existed just above their heads, a plane of reality that permeated the space around Yharnam, yet remained invisible to normal human perception. The choir's research led them to terrible experiments in pursuit of transcendence. They established the orphanage, though its true purpose had little to do with caring for parentless children. Young minds, the choir believed, were more capable of accepting cosmic truth without shattering. They subjected orphans to procedures designed to expand consciousness, to create humans who could naturally perceive and interact with great ones. The results ranged from inspired to catastrophic, with most experiments ending in madness or physical transformation into kin, beings that had evolved beyond humanity but lost everything that made them individuals in the process. The celestial emissaries emerged from these experiments. These grotesque beings with oversized heads and writhing tentacles had once been human members of the choir who underwent transformation procedures designed to bring them closer to the Great Ones. They represented the choir's vision of ascension, humans who had supposedly transcended mortal limitations. But whether they had achieved enlightenment or merely a different form of damnation remained an open question. They could no longer communicate with humans in any meaningful way. They existed in a state between human and Great One, forever trapped in an evolutionary cul-de-sac that served the choir's purposes but benefited the transformed individuals not at all. Through their communion with Ebrietas and study of other Great Ones, the choir developed technologies that blurred the line between science and sorcery. The auger of Ebrietas allowed partial summoning of the Great One's tentacles, tearing through reality to strike at enemies. A call beyond channeled cosmic power into devastating star-like explosions. These weren't magical spells in any traditional sense. They were manipulations of reality itself, using the Great One's existence as a lever to pry open doors that should have remained closed. But the most important insight the choir gained concerned the nature of the old blood itself. It wasn't simply the blood of Great Ones, though it contained that essence. The blood was a medium, a substance that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, allowing it to bridge the gap between cosmic and human reality. When humans consumed the old blood, they weren't just ingesting a powerful medicine. They were inviting cosmic influence directly into their bodies, allowing Great One essence to mingle with human biology in ways that fundamentally altered both. This explained the transformations, the beast scourge that had begun appearing more frequently. The old blood didn't simply heal human bodies. It attempted to transform them into something more compatible with cosmic forces. For most humans, this transformation took the form of devolution into beasts, bodies, and minds, breaking down into primal fury as human consciousness proved unable to contain the cosmic energies flooding through it. A rare few evolved in different directions, becoming kin like the choir's experiments. But these transformations came at the cost of individual identity and human connection. The tragedy of the Great Ones was their inability to reproduce naturally. Every Great One lost its child and then yearned for a surrogate. This bizarre reproductive crisis drove much of their interaction with humanity. They sought to create offspring through human intermediaries, resulting in pregnancies and births that violated every natural law. The third umbilical cords, grotesque artifacts found throughout Yharnam, represented the remains of these failed attempts at reproduction. Queen Yharnam herself had been impregnated by Oedon, the formless Great One, resulting in Mergo, an infant Great One whose crying echoed across dimensions. But Mergo's nature remained elusive, its existence more conceptual than physical, never manifesting in a form humans could fully comprehend. The Great One's desperate desire for children created a twisted parallel with humanity's pursuit of the old blood. Both species reached across the dimensional divide seeking something they lacked. Humans wanted transcendence, healing, evolution. Great Ones wanted children, continuation, purpose. Neither species fully understood what they were offering or receiving in this cosmic transaction. The result was a merger of realities that benefited neither party, creating only suffering, transformation, and the slow dissolution of boundaries between worlds. The transformation, beast scourge emerges. The beast scourge didn't appear overnight. It crept into Yharnam gradually, isolated incidents that the healing church could contain and explain away. A missing person here, an animal attack there, always in the poorest districts where few would ask difficult questions. The church's hunters, trained by German in his workshop, dealt with these early transformations efficiently and quietly. Citizens continued their lives, continued receiving blood ministration, continued believing in the miracle of the healing church. But the frequency of transformations increased with mathematical precision. What had been monthly incidents became weekly, then nightly occurrences. The church could no longer hide the truth. Some who received the old blood were transforming into beasts. The church coined the term scourge of beasts to describe the plague, presenting it as an external threat rather than a direct consequence of blood ministration. Their official position claimed that transformations only affected those with impure blood or weak faith, encouraging citizens to prove their devotion through even more enthusiastic participation in blood ministration. The psychology was perverse but effective. If you feared becoming a beast, the solution was more blood, not less. The mechanism of transformation became a subject of intense study in the church's secret research facilities. What they discovered was both fascinating and horrifying. The change from human to beast wasn't random. It followed patterns that appeared to relate to the individual's mental and spiritual state. Based on the behavior observed during the scourge, fear seemed to accelerate transformation. Aggression hastened it. Desperation made it inevitable. The old blood appeared to respond to the darkness within human hearts, amplifying base instincts and animal nature until they overwhelmed human consciousness. Most terrifying was the observation that violence itself seemed to trigger the transformation. Those who killed, especially those who killed repeatedly, found themselves changing more rapidly. The hunt that the church had established to combat beasts was inadvertently creating more of them. Every hunter who killed transformed humans was pushed closer to becoming a beast themselves. The cycle was self-perpetuating and appeared unstoppable. The scourge beasts themselves displayed a tragic spectrum of humanity. Some transformed completely, becoming quadrupedal lupine horrors with no trace of their former selves. These were the creatures that prowled old Yharnam's burning streets, that lurked in central Yharnam's dark corners, that hunted in packs through the cathedral ward. Their bodies had been completely overtaken, reshaped into forms optimized for violence and predation. Others retained humanoid shapes even as fur sprouted and claws emerged, caught between human and beast in a state of perpetual agony. Their faces, still partially recognizable, twisted in expressions that seemed to convey both rage and desperation. Some wore the tattered remnants of their former clothes, pathetic reminders of the people they had been. Wedding rings hung loose on fingers that had become talons. Church garments hung in strips from bodies that had grown too large to contain them. All showed signs of intelligence, enough to use tools and tactics, enough to recognize former friends and family before attacking them, enough to suffer from awareness of what they had become. This awareness made them more dangerous and more pitiable in equal measure. The historical precedent should have warned Yharnam of its fate. In the Pthumerian ruins, evidence existed of other civilizations consumed by beast scourges. Laurence, one of the ancient Pthumerian settlements, had fallen to exactly this plague. The silver beasts and dark beasts found in Laurence's chalice dungeons showed the endpoint of transformation, creatures that had evolved beyond flesh into beings of pure electrical energy and rage. The cycle had repeated before. It was repeating again. Yharnam's trajectory mirrored Laurence's with eerie precision. The Healing Church's researchers found references to the cycle in fragmentary Pthumerian texts. Civilizations discovered the old blood, used it for healing and enhancement, became addicted to its benefits, and eventually succumbed to the beast scourge it inevitably caused, Some theorize that the Great Ones deliberately orchestrated this cycle, using human civilizations as breeding grounds for their sought-after children. Others believed it was simply the natural consequence of incompatible realities attempting to merge. Regardless of cause, the pattern seemed inescapable. The addiction aspect of blood ministration became increasingly apparent as the years passed. Citizens who had received the blood once found themselves craving more. The healing effects required increasingly frequent treatments to maintain. People reported feeling incomplete without regular ministrations, as if the blood had become necessary for life itself, as essential as food or water or air. Withdrawal symptoms appeared in those who went too long without ministration: weakness, tremors, vivid nightmares, and an overwhelming sense of emptiness. The Healing Church encouraged this dependency, though they never called it addiction. They presented regular blood ministration as a form of communion, a spiritual practice as well as a medical one. The more blood you received, the closer you came to divine truth. The more often you partook, the more pure your faith. Regular blood ministration became a sign of devotion, of commitment to the Church's teachings. Those who abstained were viewed with suspicion. Why would anyone refuse the Church's gift unless they harbored doubts or impure intentions? This spiritual framework masked the biological reality. The old blood was fundamentally addictive because it was changing recipients at a cellular level, making them dependent on cosmic energies that human bodies couldn't produce naturally. The psychology of Yharnam shifted as the scourge became undeniable. The city that had welcomed pilgrims now viewed outsiders with paranoia. After all, if impure blood caused transformations, then surely foreigners carried the greatest risk. The Church did nothing to discourage this xenophobia. It provided convenient scapegoats for the increasing number of beast incidents. Lynch mobs formed, hunting suspected beasts, or simply those who seemed different. The irony that Yharnam's prosperity had come from foreign pilgrims was lost in the growing hysteria. The transformation wasn't only physical. Yharnam's soul was changing, becoming harder, crueler, more willing to accept violence as normal. The nightly hunts became institutionalized, times when citizens locked their doors and let the hunters do their grim work. The sounds of the hunt became Yharnam's nighttime symphony. Howling beasts, clashing steel, dying screams, and always the bells of the grand cathedral marking the hours until dawn. Morning after a hunt revealed a city painted in blood, bodies of beasts piled for burning, and sometimes horrifyingly recognizable faces among the slain. The line between human and monster blurred not just biologically, but morally. The hunters who killed beasts were celebrated as heroes, even as they themselves drew closer to transformation. The citizens who participated in mobs were praised for their vigilance, even as they committed atrocities. Yharnam was becoming monstrous in ways that had nothing to do with physical transformation. The response: hunters and the workshop. When the beast scourge could no longer be hidden or denied, the Healing Church's response was not to halt blood ministration, but to establish a permanent armed force capable of dealing with transformations as they occurred. Gehrman, who had been among Laurence's companions at Bergenworth and had served as protection during expeditions into the Pthumerian ruins, became the architect of this new order. The workshop he established became more than a weapons manufactory. It was the birthplace of a new type of warrior, hunters who would wage eternal war against the consequences of humanity's hubris. The workshop itself was a marvel of engineering, filled with tools and equipment that transformed the craft of weapon making into an art form. Forges burned with flames that never seemed to cool. Anvils rang with the sound of hammer on steel. The air smelled of oil, leather, and blood, always blood. Gehrman understood from the beginning that hunting beasts was fundamentally different from conventional warfare. Beasts were fast, strong, and driven by primal fury that made them unpredictable and relentless. They felt no fear, showed no mercy, and possessed strength that could tear through armor and bone with equal ease. Conventional weapons and tactics proved inadequate against such opponents. A knight in full plate might survive a battle against other humans, but against a beast, all that armor became a coffin. The workshop developed trick weapons, mechanical marvels that could transform between forms, offering versatility that standard arms couldn't match. The saw cleaver extended from brutal cleaving instrument to longer serrated blade. The hunter's axe shifted from one-handed weapon to devastating two-handed crusher. Each weapon was a masterpiece of engineering and a testament to the workshop's understanding that fighting monsters required tools designed specifically for that purpose. The weapons were beautiful in their brutality, elegant in their lethality, and terrifying in their effectiveness. They were made not just to kill, but to kill things that should not exist. But Gehrman's greatest creation wasn't a weapon. It was the hunter's dream, a pocket dimension existing outside normal time and space. How Gehrman gained access to this realm remains shrouded in mystery, though evidence from workshop notes suggests involvement from the moon presence, a great one whose motivations were as inscrutable as its form was terrifying. The dream served multiple purposes. It provided a training ground where hunters could hone their skills without risk of permanent death. It offered refuge from the horrors of the hunt. And most importantly, it bound hunters to a cycle they could never truly escape. Hunters who accessed the dream gained a form of immortality. Death simply returned them to the workshop in the dream, ready to continue their hunt. This seemed like a blessing, a way to ensure the hunt could continue indefinitely. But it was also a curse. Each death, each return, eroded something essential. Hunters began to forget their lives before the dream, their reasons for fighting, everything except the hunt itself. They became instruments of violence, no different from the weapons they wielded. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower became Gehrman's most talented student. Her skill with the rakuyo, a blade that separated into dual weapons, was matched only by her growing horror at what the hunt required. The beasts they killed had been human beings, patients who had come to Yharnam seeking healing. Each hunt forced her to confront the terrible truth that the church continued to deny. The old blood was not a cure, but a curse, transforming recipients into the very monsters that hunters were created to kill. The evolution of hunting as a profession revealed the full extent of the trap Yharnam had fallen into. The hunters needed blood to sustain themselves during their battles. Blood vials became essential equipment, consumed constantly to heal wounds that would otherwise prove fatal. But using blood meant exposing themselves to the same transformative forces that created beasts. The fundamental contradiction couldn't be resolved. Hunters needed blood to hunt, but blood inevitably corrupted them. The more successful a hunter became, the closer they drew to becoming what they fought. Different hunting factions emerged, each with their own philosophies and methods. The powder kegs favored explosives and firearms, arguing for aggressive tactics and scorched earth policies. The executioners, servants of martyr Logarius, hunted not just beasts, but also the vile bloods of Cainhurst, whom they saw as corrupted by their own relationship with blood. The League, led by Walter, pursued vermin, parasitic entities they believed were the true cause of the scourge. Each faction developed elaborate justifications for their approach, but all shared the same ultimate fate: corruption by the very thing they fought. Father Gascoigne exemplified the tragic path of many hunters. A foreign priest who came to Yharnam with his family, he took up the hunt to protect his wife and daughters. His skill with the hunter's axe became legendary. But each hunt changed him, made him more violent, more eager for the kill. His wife watched helplessly as the man she loved slowly disappeared, replaced by something that lived only for blood and battle. The music box his daughter treasured played a melody from Gascoigne's homeland, one of the few things that could calm him when bloodlust grew too strong. But even this anchor to humanity weakened over time. The night he failed to return home, the night the music box could no longer reach him, marked not just the loss of one hunter, but a demonstration of hunting's inevitable conclusion. The hunter's dream maintained its hold on those bound to it through mechanisms that appeared to involve the moon presence directly. Gehrman himself seemed to be the first victim of this arrangement, bound to a wheelchair, unable to leave the dream, forced to guide new hunters while begging in his sleep to be released from bondage. The doll, an animate figure modeled after Lady Maria, served the dream's hunters with unwavering devotion. She could channel blood echoes, the essence left behind by defeated enemies, transforming death into strength. But her existence raised profound questions about consciousness and purpose. Was she truly alive, or merely an elaborate puppet? Did her feelings exist independently, or were they projections of hunters' desperate need for connection in their isolated struggle? The weapons scattered throughout the dream told stories of previous hunters, their triumphs and inevitable falls. Each blade and firearm carried memories of those who had wielded them. Their hopes gradually eroded by the endless cycle of hunting and dying and hunting again. The dream preserved not just objects, but the entire history of the hunt, a museum of humanity's struggle against darkness it had invited into itself. The workshop became a tomb as much as a sanctuary, filled with the ghosts of hunters who had lost themselves to bloodlust or transformation. The experiments, research hall, and forbidden knowledge. High above Yharnam's blood-soaked streets, accessible only through hidden passages in the Grand Cathedral, the research hall represented the healing church's most ambitious and most horrific experiments. Officially a medical facility to treat those showing early signs of the beast scourge, it evolved into a chamber of horrors where the boundaries of medical ethics dissolved completely. The patients admitted to the research hall never left, at least not in any form recognizable as human. The facility itself was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, twisted to sinister purpose. Its high ceilings and elaborate metalwork suggested a place of healing and enlightenment. But the restraints built into the examination tables, the drainage systems designed to handle large quantities of bodily fluids, and the soundproofing in certain chambers told a different story. This was not a hospital. It was a laboratory where human beings served as experimental subjects in the church's desperate quest to understand and control the transformations caused by the old blood. Lady Maria oversaw the research hall during its darkest period. Her medical knowledge combined with hunter training made her uniquely qualified to study the transformation process, though this qualification would become her greatest burden. The church's goal was understanding the relationship between consciousness and transformation, determining if the beast scourge could be prevented or guided toward different evolutionary outcomes. What they discovered was that beast transformation represented just one possible result of old blood exposure. With proper manipulation, humans could be guided toward different forms of evolution, though proper was a word that lost all meaning in the research hall's sterile corridors. The experiments focused on expanding consciousness rather than physical form. Researchers operated on patients' skulls, grafting additional brain tissue harvested from other subjects, modifying sensory organs to perceive frequencies beyond normal human range, attempting to manually create the eyes on the inside that Master Willem had theorized about. The results were abominations that made the beast plague seem merciful. Patients developed enlarged heads that could no longer be supported by human necks. Their consciousness expanded but fragmented, experiencing multiple realities simultaneously without the ability to distinguish between them. Some patients' heads literally burst from the pressure of thoughts too vast for human skulls to contain. Others achieved a form of enlightenment that manifested as endless screaming, their minds touching truths that human vocal cords could express only as pure, anguished sound. The living failures represented the research hall's most notorious experiments. These beings had successfully evolved beyond human limitations, gaining abilities and perceptions that surpassed their original forms. But they had lost everything that made them individuals. The living failures existed as a collective consciousness, each member aware of all others but incapable of independent thought or action. They had achieved a form of immortality and cosmic awareness at the cost of humanity, identity, and free will. The church's experiments extended beyond Yharnam's borders in their search for subjects showing unique reactions to the old blood. The fishing hamlet massacre became the church's greatest atrocity and most closely guarded secret. This small coastal village had discovered the corpse of Kos, a great one that had washed ashore like a massive, impossible whale. The villagers, not understanding what they had found, treated it with reverence. But proximity to Kos's corpse changed them in subtle but profound ways. They began experiencing shared dreams of underwater cities and cosmic oceans. Their catches grew strange. Some villagers developed an unusual affinity for water. The presence of Kos's corpse, it seemed, had introduced the old blood to the hamlet through proximity rather than consumption. When the healing church learned of the hamlet and its divine corpse, they saw an unprecedented opportunity to study a great one directly. The scholars and hunters sent to the hamlet ostensibly came to help the villagers deal with their situation. The villagers, trusting and naive, welcomed these visitors, not recognizing them as predators. What happened next would haunt Maria for the rest of her life and create a curse that would trap hunters for eternity. The scholars didn't simply study Kos's corpse. They desecrated it. They cut into the dead god with saws and scalpels, extracting blood, tissue, and organs. Most importantly, they discovered that Kos had been pregnant. The orphan, this unborn great one, was removed from its mother's corpse for study and experimentation. The villagers who tried to stop this desecration were cut down without mercy. But the massacre didn't end with those who resisted. The church scholars realized that the villagers themselves had been transformed by exposure to Kos. Their blood, their brain fluid, their very cells contained information about the great ones that couldn't be found anywhere else. The entire population became test subjects. Men, women, and children were subjected to vivisection while still alive, their skulls opened to extract the fluid within, their bodies systematically dissected in the name of knowledge. Gehrman and Maria led the hunter contingent that enabled this atrocity. While they didn't participate in the experiments directly, they eliminated anyone who tried to escape or interfere. Maria, who had always prided herself on clean, merciful kills, found herself hunting down fleeing villagers and dragging them back to the scholars. The sound of the villagers' curses, calling down cosmic wrath upon the hunters, would echo in her nightmares forever. The curse the villagers spoke proved more than mere words. The orphan of Kos, though physically dead or dying, existed in a state between life and death, consciousness and void. Its rage at being torn from its mother, at witnessing the desecration of Kos and the murder of the villagers, appears to have created the hunter's nightmare. This prison dimension trapped blood-drunk hunters for eternity, forcing them to hunt and kill in an endless cycle that mirrored their crimes. Every hunter who participated in the fishing hamlet massacre was marked by this curse, and by extension, all hunters who followed in their tradition seemed to inherit the burden of that original sin. Maria's guilt over her role in the experiments eventually overwhelmed her. She had entered the research hall believing that understanding transformation could help prevent it. Instead, she had participated in creating new forms of horror. The blood of the fishing hamlet villagers stained her hands in ways no amount of washing could cleanse. When she finally took her own life, using the very rakuyo she had once discarded in an attempt to reject her past, it was as much an attempt to escape her guilt as to atone for her sins. But death proved no escape. her consciousness persisted in the hunter's nightmare, standing guard over the secret that had driven her to suicide, ensuring that the truth about the fishing hamlet remained hidden even in death. The rituals, School of Mensis and Yharnam. While the choir sought communion with the cosmos through study and gradual transformation, the School of Mensis pursued a more direct and catastrophic approach. Led by Mikolash, who had been among Laurence's fellow students at Bergenworth, the school believed humanity could forcefully breach the barrier between human reality and the realm of the Great Ones. Their methods were radical, even by the standards of a city that had normalized blood consumption and nightly beast hunts. Where the choir moved with caution, the School of Mensis charged forward with reckless abandon. Where the choir sought to understand before acting, the school acted first and dealt with consequences later. This fundamental difference in philosophy would lead to some of Yharnam's most catastrophic events. The school operated from Yharnam, the unseen village, a district that had become increasingly isolated from the rest of Yharnam. The very name Unseen Village suggested its nature, a place that existed at the edges of perception, accessible only to those who knew the secret ways. The inhabitants of Yharnam participated willingly in the school's experiments, believing themselves chosen to achieve higher forms of existence. They saw themselves not as victims, but as pioneers, the vanguard of human evolution. The Mensis cage, a bizarre apparatus of iron and eyes worn by the school's scholars, supposedly facilitated communication with the Great Ones by restructuring the wearer's consciousness. The cages were heavy, uncomfortable, and once donned, seemed to fuse with the skull beneath. That many who wore the cage never removed it, and seemed incapable of doing so, troubled no one in the school who valued results over comfort or sanity. The scholars who wore the cages spoke of visions beyond description, of touching minds that existed across dimensions, of understanding that transcended language. Whether these experiences represented genuine cosmic communion or merely elaborate hallucinations induced by the cage's effects on brain function remained unclear. Mikolash's obsession with making contact with the Great Ones drove the school's research. He spoke of Kos, or as some say, Kosum, believing that proper communion with the Great Ones would grant humanity eyes on the inside, a metaphor for cosmic understanding that the school took quite literally. Their experiments grew increasingly extreme, subjecting volunteers to procedures that attempted to physically restructure their brains, adding new organs or modifying existing ones to perceive dimensions beyond the standard 3. The Snatchers, hooded figures who kidnapped victims for the school's experiments, roamed Yharnam's streets with increasing boldness. They no longer needed to hide their activities as the city descended deeper into nightmare. The bodies they collected ended up in Yharnam, used as raw material for rituals that defied comprehension. The Mensis ritual, the school's ultimate experiment, aimed to summon a Great One directly into the human world. They had obtained a third umbilical cord, an artifact of incredible power, and planned to use it as a beacon that no Great One could ignore. The ritual required sacrifices on a massive scale. The entire population of Yharnam would serve as the foundation for this cosmic summoning, their collective consciousness forming a bridge between worlds. On the night the ritual began, Yharnam vanished from normal perception. The district still existed, but accessing it became nearly impossible. Those few who managed to enter found a nightmare made manifest. The citizens of Yharnam had been fused into walls, their bodies melded with stone and brick, while their consciousness appeared to remain trapped and aware. They screamed without sound, suffered without relief. Their existence stretched across dimensions they couldn't comprehend. The ritual succeeded, but not in the way Mikolash intended. The school of Mensis did make contact with a Great One, but the human mind proved incapable of maintaining such contact while retaining any semblance of sanity or physical form. The scholars were pulled into the nightmare of Mensis, a dimension where thought and reality merged, where causality flowed backward, and where the rules of physics bent to accommodate sleeping gods. Mikolash achieved his goal of communing with a Great One, but at the cost of everything that made him human. His consciousness persisted in the nightmare, endlessly seeking knowledge that had already destroyed him, running through infinite corridors while babbling about eyes and insight and cosmic secrets that human language could never adequately express. The ritual's effects rippled beyond Yharnam. The blood moon rose over Yharnam, turning the sky crimson and bringing the hunt to its most intense phase. The boundaries between human reality and the cosmos grew thin. Amygdalas, the lesser Great Ones that had always clung to Yharnam's buildings, became visible to everyone, not just those with high insight. Citizens who had lived their entire lives unaware of the cosmic horrors literally hanging over their heads suddenly saw the truth. Many chose immediate madness over the burden of such knowledge. The One Reborn, perhaps the ritual's most grotesque manifestation, emerged from the reality-bending effects. This creature consisted of countless human bodies fused into a single writhing mass of flesh and consciousness. Each component remained partially aware, trapped in collective agony. The One Reborn represented what awaited humanity if the Great One's influence continued unchecked. Not individual transformation, but collective assimilation into forms that served cosmic purposes regardless of human suffering. The legacy, eternal night, and perpetual hunt. Yharnam exists now in a state of eternal night. The blood moon hangs perpetually in the sky, never setting, never waning. The concept of dawn has become a distant memory, something citizens speak of in hushed tones like a fairy tale. Children born during the eternal night have never seen sunlight, knowing only the pale crimson moon and the light of burning pyres. The city has adapted to perpetual darkness in disturbing ways, developing a nocturnal ecosystem where the distinction between nightmare and reality has ceased to matter. The Healing Church's final communications spoke of a plan to end the night, to break the cycle through one final massive ritual using all remaining third umbilical cords. But the church leaders who proposed this plan had already transformed into beasts or disappeared into nightmare realms. Their plan exists only as scattered notes and the ravings of mad clerics who no longer remember their own names, fragments of ambition left behind in a city that has moved beyond salvation. Some hunters seek to end the night through violence, believing that killing enough beasts, enough great ones, enough of anything will finally break the cycle. They hunt with mechanical determination, their humanity long since burned away by constant violence. These hunters have become more machine than human, existing only to kill, no longer remembering why they started hunting or what they hope to achieve. Their endless slaughter accomplishes nothing except adding more blood to Yharnam's already drowning streets. Others seek escape through transcendence, consuming ever greater quantities of old blood and seeking ever deeper insights into cosmic truth. They believe that by becoming something more than human, they can rise above the cycle of the hunt. These seekers invariably discover that transcendence and dissolution are indistinguishable, that becoming more than human means ceasing to be anything at all. The few remaining sane humans in Yharnam have developed their own survival philosophies. The chapel dweller offers kindness without expectation, maintaining humanity through compassion even as the world collapses. Others trust no one, surviving through paranoia and isolation. Both approaches have merit in a city where anyone can transform into a beast at any moment. The truth no one wants to acknowledge is that the night might never end, because it was never meant to. The hunt, the blood moon, the eternal darkness, these aren't problems to solve, but the new natural state of Yharnam. The city has been transformed at a fundamental level by its contact with the Great Ones. No amount of hunting or praying or dying will restore what has been lost. Yharnam has become a wound in reality itself, a place where the cosmic and human worlds intersected with catastrophic results. The old blood fulfilled its promise perfectly, granting immortality through endless death, healing through perpetual wounds, salvation through eternal damnation. The different endings available to the hunter who finally breaks free of the dream's cycle all lead to the same conclusion. The transformation is permanent, the damage irreparable, the curse unbreakable. One can submit to Gurman and wake from the dream, forgetting everything but continuing to see beasts on the night of the hunt. One can refuse Gurman and take his place as the dream's caretaker, becoming the next prisoner guiding future hunters. Or one can consume enough third umbilical cords to resist the moon presence, achieving transformation into a new great one, an infant of uncertain purpose and terrible potential. None of these endings offer salvation or restoration. They simply represent different forms of continuation. The hunt goes on. The blood moon remains. The old blood continues to flow through Yharnam's veins, transforming, corrupting, elevating, and destroying. The city stands as eternal testament to humanity's greatest strength and fatal flaw. The inability to resist reaching for power never meant for human hands. The compulsion to drink deeply from cups that should have remained untouched. Master Willem's warning echoes through the centuries. Fear the old blood. But fear alone was never sufficient protection against the seductive promise of transformation. The old blood offered everything humanity desperately wanted: health, power, transcendence, evolution. It delivered on every promise, but in ways that revealed those promises as curses disguised as blessings. Every disease cured left the patient vulnerable to transformation into a beast. Every life saved created a potential monster. Every step toward transcendence was a step away from humanity. The tragedy of Yharnam wasn't that the old blood failed to work as advertised. The tragedy was that it worked exactly as it was always going to work, transforming humans into beings that could exist in closer proximity to the Great Ones at the cost of everything that made them human. The curse of the old blood extends beyond individual transformation. It has created a self-perpetuating cycle that feeds on human hope and desperation. Those who seek cures become vectors for further contamination. Those who hunt beasts accelerate their own transformation. Those who pursue knowledge of the Great Ones invite cosmic forces that destroy human consciousness. The cycle has no exit because every apparent solution is actually another step deeper into the trap. Conclusion. As we emerge from the depths of Yharnam's tragedy, we're left with profound questions about the nature of salvation and damnation, about the price of knowledge and the cost of ambition. The old blood represents more than just a fictional substance in a video game. It embodies humanity's eternal struggle with forces beyond our comprehension, our willingness to sacrifice everything for promises of power and transcendence. The story of Yharnam is a cautionary tale that resonates across cultures and eras. Every civilization that has reached too far, that has pursued knowledge without wisdom, that has embraced power without understanding its cost, has walked a path parallel to Yharnam's. The specific details change, the names and places shift, but the fundamental pattern remains constant. We discover something that promises to solve our problems. We ignore warnings about its dangers. We convince ourselves that we can control forces that previous civilizations could not. We pay the price when our hubris is revealed as folly. The cycle repeats because we are human, and hubris is perhaps the most human trait of all. What makes Bloodborne's narrative so powerful is how it presents this cycle without judgment or easy answers. Master Willem wasn't wrong to fear the old blood, but his caution offered no practical solutions to human suffering. How do you tell a parent whose child is dying that the cure must be refused because it might have consequences decades or generations later? How do you choose slow philosophical evolution over immediate relief from pain? Laurence wasn't wrong to see the blood's healing potential, but his optimism blinded him to inevitable consequences. He saw people suffering and believed he could save them. That compassion, that desire to help, was admirable. But it led to catastrophe because compassion without wisdom can be as dangerous as cruelty. The healing church performed genuine miracles even as it sowed the seeds of catastrophe. Thousands were healed who would have died. Families were kept whole. Children grew to adulthood who would have perished in infancy. These victories were real and meaningful, but they were purchased with the currency of transformation, addiction, and eventual damnation. The hunters were both heroes defending humanity and monsters becoming what they fought. They saved lives by taking others. They protected the innocent by becoming increasingly less innocent themselves. The complexity, the moral ambiguity, the recognition that good intentions pave roads to terrible destinations. This is what elevates Bloodborne's lore from simple horror to genuine tragedy. There are no clear villains in this story, only people making choices that seem reasonable at the time, only to discover that the path to hell is paved with blood ministration and the best of intentions. The Old Blood's legacy is written in transformation and loss. Yharnam will never return to what it was. The citizens who remain are forever changed, whether through physical transformation into beasts, mental dissolution from cosmic insight, or simply the trauma of surviving in a city where nightmare is everyday reality. The knowledge gained cannot be unlearned. The doors open cannot be closed. The boundaries crossed cannot be restored. Yet there is something almost beautiful in the tragedy, a recognition that humanity's drive to transcend limitations, to seek knowledge regardless of cost, to pursue transformation even at the risk of destruction. These impulses are fundamental to who we are. We are cursed to reach for the old blood in whatever form it takes, cursed to believe that this time will be different, cursed to repeat the cycle, because the alternative is stagnation and acceptance of our limitations. Perhaps that curse is also what makes us human. If you've made it this far through our journey into Yharnam's darkest secrets, I want to thank you for walking this blood-soaked path with me. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Old Blood's tragic legacy, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It genuinely helps me continue creating these explorations into gaming's most compelling lore. The hunt continues, my friends. The blood moon hangs eternal. And somewhere, in dimensions that overlap with our own, the Great Ones dream of things that make even nightmares seem like mercy. Until next time, fear the old blood, and may you find your worth in the waking world.